The Actylus Empire is rich in heirs, the strongest of whom takes the throne. This means that whoever survives the killing of the others becomes emperor. At the succession ceremony at the age of 13, he killed all his siblings to become crown prince and brought them to the emperor and pointed a sword at them. The wily father, impressed by the younger prince's strength, praised him in every possible way. And at that moment, a sword thrust into the emperor's chest. The young prince smiled innocently as he stood in front of his father, who was choking on his own blood. Then he said that he was tired of waiting, so he wanted to ascend the throne now, because he was annoyed that there was someone more important than him. That was none other than the current emperor, Raniero Actylus. And so the day came when the pink-haired girl was led to the wedding with Raniero Actylus and asked if she wished, under the auspices of a god, to have their family relationship sealed for eternity. It was then that the protagonist realized that she had just been sold by her family as a bride to the ruthless emperor. Looking at the priest, it became obvious to the girl that he was looking at her so intently, demanding an immediate answer, so she had no choice but to agree. At the same time, her fiancé explained to the priest that they could continue the ceremony until he got bored. And then the priest, frightened, immediately suggested that the young people exchange rings, and the ceremony ended. The excited protagonist stretched her hands to the ring, but was very worried, begging herself not to drop it, because if the ring falls, her head will also fall from her shoulders in the next 5 minutes. In the end, all succeeded, and the girl, shaking hands, but put the ring on the finger of the emperor. The emperor immediately reached for the girl's face and took off her veil. She shrank back and began to prepare herself for what was about to happen. But to his surprise, despite the fact that the veil was removed, nothing happened, and she thought that the emperor just decided to skip this moment of the wedding ceremony. But when she looked back at him, she noticed that Raniero leaned over her and began to scrutinize her face as if he wanted to memorize it well. But suddenly, Raniero did something even stranger. He just started smiling and was happy that he was lucky, and even the girl didn't understand what it could mean. Then the main character was convinced that she obviously didn't know how her story would end. But suddenly, Raniero grabbed the girl by the waist, pulling her closer to him, smiled, and explained that if the protagonist opened her eyes 5 seconds later, he would die of boredom, and he obviously didn't want that. It's hard to believe, but it was at this point in the novel that the protagonist got into the novel and found herself reborn at a wedding ceremony with an inadequate villain emperor. He even killed his beloved's first love, the holy knight Eden. The girl who could not bear it lost control and went into a rage. Then the emperor and fell into a vicious trap of fate, which punished him. So such was the prologue of the novella entitled Flowers Grow Even in the Abyss. Although there were different characters in the work, the protagonist became the empress who is least known. The reason why she was so little known in the story was quite simple. In a society where everyone can have only one spouse and it is impossible to divorce, or a second marriage is allowed only after the death of the partner, when the emperor kidnapped the saint, he immediately cut off the head of his wife in order to be able to remarry. So the empress, whose name was not even mentioned in the story, is beheaded at the very beginning of the novel, and the protagonist moved into her body. The girl still did not understand why the author came up with such a punishment for her. When the protagonist read the novel, she left it the lowest reviews, because such could not be considered a romance novel. She did not understand what this story was doing in the romance department. For her reading experience, the protagonist had reread many novels, and not only romance novels, so she had heard about the rebirth of the soul. But it seemed to her that the usual heroes should become a villain's body, and they changed the course of the original story, avoiding the deeds committed by the villains themselves. But the protagonist was the least lucky. The girl was reborn into the most inconspicuous minor character. She realized that it would be much better if she was a villain, and then she could try to act against the original story. The protagonist did not understand what she can do now. If she appeared in this world before, the first thing she would do to avoid this marriage, for example, would fake her own death by throwing a carriage off a cliff. She could already imagine how the emperor would react to someone trying to tame him thoughtlessly. But now all she thought about was that she didn't want to die, and the only option left was to live as if she were already dead, but with some modifications. The novel said that Raniero never visited the Empress after the ceremony. The Empress tried to gently protest this, but she reminded him of her existence too often, so the Emperor got rid of her as soon as he brought the saint. But the protagonist did not intend to commit such rash acts as the Empress, and on the day when Raniero went to the temple, she would pretend to be dead and run away. The girl doubted that her current husband would look for confirmation of the death of the Empress. After all, she was killed so that the saint could take her place. But if the Empress did not interfere with her husband, he would not be so worried and would not kill her. And then, when all her thoughts came together, the protagonist realized that actually saving her was much easier than she thought. So now that she had figured it all out, everything was sure to end well. But while she was quietly rejoicing that she could finally get out of this story, Raniero came up to her and turned to his Empress. He was interested in how long the girl was going to stand aside and pretend that he did not exist. And with a sly smile, he assumed that the protagonist had decided to ignore him. Looking at his face, it was obvious to the girl that this smile obviously didn't mean anything good. The heroine had already decided to live an unnoticed life, but in a second, she managed to ruin everything. When the protagonist didn't answer, the Emperor asked the girl why she didn't answer him. And the protagonist in turn began to convince him that she did not ignore, because she could not have acted so disrespectfully. But suddenly, she stepped on the edge of her dress, after which she sprawled across the room, realizing how shameful the situation looked. Although she was pleased that despite her shame, she was able to answer Raniero Actilus quickly enough. Even Seraphima in the novel was tortured if she was slow to respond. Countless servants had suffered because they had not thought to correct what the Emperor did not like. Raniero Actilus gave 5 seconds to answer, and also many words in conversation with him were basically forbidden to use. Then coming closer, the guy stepped on the girl's dress and demanded that the protagonist raise her face, and smilingly explained that he wanted to give the Empress a chance to explain herself. Then, the girl kneeled down and began to think about what she could say, and sharply cried out that she had a chronic illness that made her faint with her eyes open. The Emperor was amazed that the girl who had just become his consort had already decided to shout at him. Then the frightened heroine, still sitting on her knees, whispered the same words as her excuse. Raniero grudgingly explained that the letter he had received from the Kingdom of Unro about her illness did not say anything about her illness. In the end, she found nothing better than to say that the illness was a rare enough phenomenon, or perhaps the presence of the Imperial Majesty had influenced the aggravation of her illness, because she might have been a little overexcited, because it was difficult for such a timid person as the protagonist to bear it all. Then Boing Raniero agreed with the words of the Empress, but asked whether she considered her fall to be entirely his fault. Even as the girl came up with her excuse, she had already guessed that such a thing could happen, and she explained to the Emperor that anyone who looked at the sun would definitely go blind. However, no one blames the sun. Then the Emperor began to think about what else to say, and the main character did not beg that he finally left, because she had already run out of fantasy, and she did not know what to say to his next dissatisfaction. Raniero then asked about his wife's intentions. He thought that she planned not to look at him for the rest of her life, because she was afraid of fainting. The awkward girl explained that if the Emperor was okay with it, she would be very happy, but suddenly he gave her his consent. Although from their dialogue it was unclear what exactly he agreed to, because it could be interpreted in different ways, and the Emperor could either give her permission not to look at him or to look at him. So the main character didn't have to answer anything quickly, because the answer was given no more than 5 seconds. But if she made the wrong choice, she'd lose her head. So she tried to figure out which option was better for him. But the protagonist suggested that maybe the Emperor had given her permission to look at him. And when she looked up at the man, but he only smiled, explaining that the Empress had done her job well and he was having fun. So he thought he had made the right decision, because now with such a wife he was not bored. Suddenly, from fright, the girl began to hiccup loudly. Looking at her, the man wondered if her hiccuping and these strange sounds were also one of the consequences of her chronic illness. But it wasn't, because her stomach was cramped from such a strong experience. After looking carefully at the protagonist and stroking her face, the emperor realized that the girl was not too proud, and if she did something wrong, she immediately bowed down and immediately responded to him. So he thought she was quite intelligent. And if the empress was really that kind of person, that would please him. But grabbing the girl by her frail neck, the emperor explained that she was able to please him, so he even wanted to reward her. As a reward, she could ask him any question, and he would kindly answer it. The protagonist thought it was a rather silly reward, because if he didn't like her question, he would arrange something out of the ordinary again. But shaking with fear, the protagonist explained that she had heard that the emperor had chosen her personally. She wondered why she had been chosen. At first, Raniero laughed, but after grabbing the girl by the neck, he explained that it was not an interesting question, because it was too predictable, and in a way, the guy was even disappointed. After all, one could go crazy with boredom answering this question. After that, he released the girl from the grip of his hands and explained that she was very lucky because he promised to spare her. But still, he decided to answer the question of the protagonist. Raniero explained that after the announcement of his upcoming wedding, aristocrats and kings sent him portraits of their daughters. There were so many portraits, so many, that they could fill the walls of this room, and he had even ordered that all the portraits be hung in the room, and he wondered if the empress could guess why he had ordered it. The protagonist suggested that he wanted to examine the appearance of these girls, but Raniero explained that such things did not interest him, because he could not distinguish between people, because they were too similar. The protagonist didn't understand why Raniero said that, but she remembered that his face was the most beautiful in the world, so hardly anyone would want a different spouse. And the guy himself was used to the fact that compared to him, all other men were just scary squids. But suddenly, the girl noticed a small crack in the wall near her, and the guy explained that he sat down beside his bed and started throwing a dagger at different portraits. And then, the dagger hit the left eye of the portrait of the protagonist. And he found it very entertaining, so he chose her. Thinking about it, Raniero Actilus thought that even the story of this situation and the reaction of the protagonist amused him. So he explained that he hadn't gone crazy with boredom after all, but he thought the girl was not funny at all, very tedious and unfunny, so he was tired of talking to her and decided to go away to sleep. The frightened protagonist did not understand what she should do. Now Raniero was not happy. But earlier he said that he was satisfied with the fact that you chose her, and even said that such an empress like her is not so bad. But suddenly Raniero turned around and approached the protagonist again, and wondered what was the name of the empress, for he had never heard her name before. Then the girl calmly exhaled and looked into the eyes of the emperor and introduced herself. Her name was Angelica Vineyard de Unro. Raniero then also asked the girl what her loved ones usually called her, and she explained that she was simply called Angelica. Raniero lifted his foot, and with the edge of his shoe, lifted the girl's face, turning her gaze to himself, and explained that she should continue in the same manner in order not to anger him. He realized that he would soon get tired of this girl and would have no problem getting rid of the empress. So for him, such words were just a warning, but for the girl, it was an opportunity to survive. She smiled and promised the man that she would try to improve. And then he smiled and went away, leaving the frightened protagonist alone in her room. As soon as he left, the girl immediately lay down on the stone floor, rejoicing that she had survived this conversation and was able to survive. And she was happy that she could immediately remember the name of her heroine as soon as she was asked about it. The protagonist was not sure that when Raniero met with Saint Seraphima, the empress was Angelica, because in the novel her name was never mentioned, because Angelica was killed shortly after the wedding. But it seems with Raniero's wife, Actilus in the novel, was some other girl, and spoke of herself as the fifth empress. But finally the wedding day was over, and now the girl hoped that she would be all right if she kept quiet. In the morning, the girl slept badly, tormented by nightmares, but suddenly she heard the voice of the emperor lying next to her, who explained to the girl that she was sleeping too restlessly, and so he wanted to count to 3 and give her a chance to get up. She immediately jumped up from her bed and looking at the man, she wondered what he was doing and why he hadn't left yet. But he calmly explained that he just didn't want to go to his room. And then the frightened Angelica couldn't believe that she had made such a mistake. But when the young man approached her, he explained that even an idiot would have understood from her face what the girl was thinking. He also could not believe that Angelica woke up after 9 a.m. and considered the Empress lazy. Shocked, Angelica couldn't believe that she woke up so late and didn't understand why nobody woke her up. But she didn't ask about it. And Raniero, calmly understood from his seat, began to dress and again reminded the girl that she was absolutely uninteresting, monotonous, and boring. So he felt a kind of ennui around her. As soon as he left, Angelica began to think about everything that had happened, and the fact that just yesterday, Raniero said that he was glad that he had chosen her. But today, he was already scolding her in every possible way. But her maid came and explained to the Empress that she had come to help her get ready, and suggested she take a bath first. While the maids helped her wash her hair and body, the protagonist continued to reflect on what had happened. She hoped she had done enough, because Raniero had already found her monotonous and boring, and so most likely, judging from his character, he would not come to her again. So she asked the maid what the date was. Today was May 20th. In the original story, in the middle of winter, the emperor met the saint in the temple of Tunia. So realizing that 6 months was not a short time, the girl hoped that she would be able to escape. But the problem was that until yesterday, all the protagonist remembered was that the empress's name was Angelica. She was the second princess of the kingdom of Unro. She also had an older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother. The girl remembered her family relationships well, and that was a good sign. Angelica was also a member of the royal family, and so she was probably learning the basics of geography and history. So she began to think about which country would be the best place to escape to. It would have to be a country with a border close to the palace. It would also have to be a place that was not hostile to the empire or heavily guarded. It didn't matter to the heroine how weak or strong the country was, because either way, the empire would fall by spring. The protagonist of the story was Seraphima, the saint of Tunia. There was also the holy knight Eden, who was the saint's unrequited love, and the protagonist was Raniero, the brilliant but despotic monarch. If Raniero kills the holy knight and goes down the path of disaster with Seraphima, the empire, which depended entirely on a brilliant monarch, will fall. But Angelica didn't care, for now her most important goal was to survive. Her personal maid had by this time finished the Empress's preparations and prepared breakfast for her, which she had already put on the table. Then, looking at all this breakfast, the girl wondered if she could eat in her room in such comfort. She was surprised by the professionalism of the maids. They were trained much better than in movies or novels. Her maids just did their job and did not try to please her or befriend her. Angelica was going to run away anyway, but if she got close to some people for no reason, she could get in some trouble. So she wanted to try to act like a cold-blooded empress. But still she smiled and turned to the servants and explained that she didn't even know their names, so she asked them to introduce themselves. Then, bowing, the women apologized for her late greeting. The first of them was the mother of Marquis Jacques. After that bowed, the other girl explained that she was the wife of Count Luc and her name was Miran. Also, both girls considered it a great honor to serve for the good of the Empress. Then, thinking about their statuses, the protagonist realized that they were all aristocrats from famous families. But when talking to these women, the girl had some strange feeling of discomfort, as if something was wrong. The protagonist explained that both women had done a good job because everything was new to her, so she would appreciate it if the maids would guide her and help her until she got used to the place, and asked what her plans were for the day. But the woman smiled and explained that the Empress had no official appointments for today, so she could rest easy, and the excited girl agreed to take the day off and began to think about the fact that she had another 6 months to escape. So she hoped that nothing would happen if she rested a bit. The next day, it happened again, and she was told that she didn't have any, and eventually it happened again and again. So it turned out that the Empress had none of their official meetings and business. And now Angelica finally realized what her strange feeling was. The maids purposely kept her away from her work, even though even common sense told the protagonist that not much was required of the Empress. But she could do such work as checking on various departments, approving the palace budget, friendship with noble ladies, and other people. So Angelica decided that she needed to familiarize herself with the documents for the last year, and then she could get to work. But she didn't understand if she should ask about this first. After all, it seemed to her that it should be the job of her assistant. Now it was also obvious to the protagonist why she thought the maids were real professionals. They behaved politely so they wouldn't get caught. But if the girl talked about the problem, she would be the only strange person. And she was obviously still not accepted at the palace and treated like an outsider. She was obviously very annoyed by this, but she didn't know how to solve the problem yet. But it was obvious that the protagonist couldn't go on living like this. She remembered one of the maids who couldn't believe that the princess would obey such a crazy emperor, because she had heard that Angelica was marrying Raniero Actilus and couldn't believe it. Then when she remembered the girl, she realized that her heroine had brought a maid with her from the kingdom. I think her name was Sicien. Later, during the tea party, Angelica asked her new maids directly about the whereabouts of the maid Sicien, whom she had brought with her, because Angelica had not seen her for a long time. The maids explained to her that in order to become a worthy servant of the Empress, she had to be trained again, but Angelica thought this was strange, for she had not been told anything about it. She immediately noticed the silence around her. She knew that if she were Raniero Actilus, she would have been answered immediately. But still she decided to act gently and explained that she had nothing against training her maids. But it seemed strange to her that as the girl's mistress, she knew nothing of her fate. So she asked that the maid be brought in because she wanted to see her. Then the worried woman asked Angelique why she had not asked about it before, because everyone thought that she already knew the latest news. Then, looking at the reaction of the maid, Angelique realized that this was a cunning woman who probably wanted to fight with her. But still, the Empress realized that now the best solution would be to smile and apologize, because when she apologized first, the woman would have nothing to say to her. After all, now she had fed her pride well. But still, Angelica insisted on being told what had happened to Sicien. Later, the woman shouted furiously, complaining to her son about what had happened. She was not happy because she thought Angelique was just some idiot, but she turned out to be a real monster according to the woman. Her son Marquis Jacques asked his mother to tell her what had really happened, and then his mother told him that Angelique had decided to fight with them, even though she was some idiot from a small country, but she didn't know her place at all. But suddenly, Sylvia appeared in the room. She was the brother of the Marquis Jacques, and she was interested in what had happened to her mother and why she was only displeased. Sighing, she explained that if Sylvia became the Empress, she would not have to worry so much. In fact, no one had ever objected to Sylvia becoming the Emperor's wife. There were also a lot of people lining up just to please their family, as the daughter of the family had been nominated as a contender for the Empress. However, the second princess of the kingdom became the next Empress. Her mother was very sorry that Sylvia had already missed her marriageable age while waiting for the Emperor's reply. But she honestly admitted that she was absolutely shocked that the girl who was lucky enough to be the Empress was looking at her with such frightened eyes. Sylvia explained to her mother that it was their Emperor's choice after all, so her mother shouldn't argue with him in any way or regret anything, and asked her brother to take her side as well. But the woman continued to be angry with Angelica, for she considered her to be a good-for-nothing. Although she thought that perhaps she had incredible skills in bed, otherwise the mother of the Marquis could not understand such a choice of the Emperor. Frightened, Sylvia asked her mother to be careful with words, but the woman could not calm down. She was madly angry because she waited for a very long time. But in the end, the value of her daughter only fell, so now all Sylvia was useless. And then the frightened and humiliated Sylvia, seen as an object to be sold, ran away. Looking after her sister, Marquis Jacques asked his mother not to worry. She explained to her son that he was right, and the boy smilingly explained to his mother that he was, after all, a deputy minister and a marquis, and he was sure that the emperor was not interested in that woman. Therefore, if they found a reason, the emperor would destroy the empress with his own hand. After all, everyone knew his character. And all they needed to depose that girl was just some decent excuse. Mother liked the idea and smiled as she realized what to do. After all, the woman she served definitely had many faults, and they just needed to find the right time to inform the emperor. The boy was glad that his mother had figured it out right away, because the Marquis knew better than anyone else that the emperor made decisions based on personal gain alone. That's the reason why the empire was in its heyday. All they had to do was make a good plan. And by then it's time to approve the budget. Only the emperor and the empress have the authority to do so. But if the empress doesn't work at all, it was unforgivable. The girl was just wandering around looking for her maid. And everyone realizes that this is an obstacle to the prosperity of the empire. In the end, it's been a few days since Sisian returned to Angelica, and it's been a quiet few days. As the protagonist thought, Sisian knows Angelica really well and all her preferences. Meanwhile, the abuse from her mother and the Marquis Jacques continued, but the protagonist decided to ignore all the maids completely. But that was not the only problem. And perhaps if Angelique had noticed the problem earlier, this would not have happened. For now she had to appear before her husband, the emperor. The emperor called her to talk to him, and no matter how much Angelica thought about it, she thought it was one of the maids who was to blame. But she didn't understand who was to blame. But since everything happened as it was, the only decision Angelica could make was to bow lower than the others, hoping for her husband's mercy. Raniero didn't understand how the empress could bow her head in public without even realizing why she was doing it, and was worried that something was wrong with her legs. She explained that her legs were indeed weak, but it was not a problem. And then the emperor let everyone else begin to speak. Right after snapping his fingers, Marquis Jacques explained that he was the deputy minister and had prepared the budget for the third quarter. However, there was a problem with the allocation of funds for the palace, so he wanted the woman to be asked about it in more detail. Raniero was surprised at how bold the empress was and thought she had too much chutzpah, so she was clearly no match for the imperial family. He wondered what Angelique was thinking when she approved such a large budget for the palace. But then Marquis Jacques explained that the empress was indulging in entertainment instead of taking care of the palace, since she had no intention of performing her duties, set the cost of doing her work to the officials. And then, still on her knees, Angelique realized that Marquise's mother had not asked her to do things just for the sake of the moment. The minister continued to speak, explaining that the cost of entertaining the empress was an unimaginable sum, and the ministers had ignored the situation for some time, hoping that the empress would change her approach to business. But now, the minister could not keep silent about it any longer. Listening to his speech, Angelica realized that it was a real disaster, and almost everything the man said was a real lie. But she had no way to defend her position, because all this time the maids were bullying her, and only Sisian, who was her personal maid, would take her side. Then the emperor asked the Marquis what he was going to do. And the guy explained that he didn't pursue any goals. He just wanted the truth to be known, considering his loyalty to the imperial family. But he trusted Raniero Actilus completely with the decision. The emperor looked at the man slyly and was surprised that he was letting him make a decision on such a matter, concerning budgets. But the minister felt that it was too important a matter that needed his attention. Angelica realized how bad her situation was, for it was true that Raniero cared a lot about his country to stay in power, and the situation was too dangerous for her. For Raniero Actilus, any dull person would be guilty, and any cheerful one uninvolved in what was coming. He must think that the empress was terribly careless to ask for such an absurd amount of money, but this problem could be solved simply by revising the budget. But trying to convince Raniero Actilus in such a boring way will get him nowhere. So now, looking over Marquise and Mother, the girl didn't realize, they didn't consider the factors of his personality? Though suddenly she thought that perhaps of all the people around her, she was the only one who understood what Raniero was really thinking. Most likely all the servants think Raniero is cruel to pleasure seekers, but they have the illusion that he genuinely cares for this country. Looking at Raniero Actilus, she immediately saw that the man was about to get angry if she didn't come up with some interesting excuse. So she started to speak, explaining to the emperor that she had behaved immorally and brazenly. After all, she should have discussed the budget with the emperor in the first place. She admitted that it was her fault that the emperor had to deal with such a boring case. So the emperor, who had to endure such a tedious event, apologized sincerely and offered him some entertainment to cheer him up. He immediately wondered what his wife would offer him, and suddenly the empress explained that she was offering him a manhunt. He was very surprised by this, as were the Marquis and his mother. Marquis immediately began to worry a lot, but Raniero asked the girl to continue. And then Angelica explained that all the inhabitants of the empire were descendants of the god of war, and that's why she heard that anyone here could become a soldier if he had the appropriate skills. And they were the ideal prey for this kind of entertainment. Seeing his smile, Angelica calmed down a little. Human hunting was a method from the original work, so the girl knew that the emperor would definitely be interested in it. The only thing that disappointed her was that she would have to be the prey. But anyway, if she did nothing, she would die anyway. But suddenly she thought of a way to save herself and reminded the emperor that she had a disease because she had recently moved in with them. So she thought it would be no fun at all to let a sick rabbit out on the hunting grounds. Raniero thought that in such a case the empress was not going to participate, but she firmly declared that this was not the case. It was a great honor for her to participate in such games. And for her husband, she decided to become a worthy prey by winter, and therefore, in order not to miss the possible fun, she asked to postpone the hunt a little. Looking at Angelique, excited Marquis tried to explain to everyone around that it was a real madness, because it sounded completely unreasonable. Angelica realized that this reaction was expected, and the subordinates clearly did not know their emperor. But she sternly looked at the man, demanded that the Marquis Jacques immediately came to his senses, and did not understand whether the validity of each action was so important to him. After all, if they had made her aware of all their problems at once, they would not have had to trouble the emperors for that reason. And so she thought that in order to compensate him for his precious wasted time, they should be a worthy prey. Then clapping his hands, Raniero happily explained that this was quite a good performance for their newly crowned empress. He was pleased with the girl's act, but the Marquis kept shouting and ready to cry, not understanding how a man could make his old mother do such cruel things and ask to be punished alone. Raniero didn't understand how he could accuse him of cruelty. After all, they had both heard the empress perfectly well, and they should all be honored to be his and his prey for his amusement. Especially as the empress had said the three of them were the guilty ones, though he still thought it was the empress who was guilty, since she couldn't talk these two out of coming here in the first place. So he called his knights, and they began to lead the two men away. Mother Marquis could not believe that the emperor was willing to do such a thing just to resolve this conflict with the empress, and thought that he could not do such a thing. When the doors closed behind them, and finally the hall became silent, Angelique realized that Raniero most likely knew about the attitude of the Marquis Jacques to him, because the younger sister of the Marquis was not chosen for the role of empress, and Raniero already knew that everything would end with that. But he did nothing, for he did not want to worry about it. Angelica wondered if Sylvia could become empress, how much the story would change. The emperor ordered the girl to raise her head, and then smiling explained that it was really not a bad sight that could amuse him, and as a reward kissed the girl. She didn't understand why Raniero was doing that, but she tried to restrain herself. But interrupting the kiss and carefully looking at the face of his wife, Raniero explained that as long as they were close, she had never been wrong. Although the protagonist in turn realized that if she made a mistake this time, she would definitely be executed. The emperor suddenly grabbed the girl in his arms and carried her to his throne, and asked her how long she was going to run away from him. Then throwing her on the throne, he started to reach for her body, but she strongly fought back, explaining that it was a throne and not a bed. But Raniero Actilus was amused by this. He explained that the throne was too big for a little girl like Angelica anyway, so she would be comfortable enough. But suddenly putting his hand on her head, the guy started stroking her hair. The girl felt like a puppy, but realized that she had to be patient in order to amuse Raniero Actilus. He began to ask if she liked it, and all the girl had to do was say yes. The next day there were big changes at the Empress's castle. Because Marquis Jacques had become a prey, his mother had to be removed as head maid. For the Empress's maids, the vacated position turned out to be a big time. But it was taken by Cicienne, Angelique's devoted maid. Angelique was grateful to Cicienne for this, for there were no others willing, so she thought Cicienne was very courageous. Angelica also apologized to the girl for not taking care of her lately. But Cicienne bent down and explained to her mistress that everything was all right, especially she was not the only one who was treated as a stranger. So she knew that Angelica was obviously not to blame. Looking at the girl, Angelica realized that Cicienne probably didn't notice the change in her. She was sorry that she was pretending to be the mistress of such a loyal girl, but she had no other choice. With the change of the head maid, rumors spread among the maids, but they were more truthful, and the Empress was no longer looked down upon, but was listened to and asked for her opinion. They even came to her to ask her what kind of flowers she wanted, but she realized that the maid should not be so worried because she was not so led. Even though the protagonist realized that she was not a princess and was clearly not a majestic empress, she was just a simple person who only knew the original story. Also, the protagonist understood that the rumors about what happened to the Marquis Jacques spread incredibly quickly, although all she wanted was a quiet life. Against the background of the rumors that have spread after all that happened, in the secular society, Angelique was considered a fiery, arrogant empress. At first it didn't bother her. After all, she was only fulfilling her duties as empress, and her days were hard enough, so it didn't bother her. But as time went on, Angelica realized that she was in trouble. At the very least, it turned out that her duties as empress were more complicated than she had originally thought. Cicienne said that Angelica was probably just not used to the rules here, but as it seemed to Angelica in this body, she had not yet reached her potential. She had to plan the landscapes and oversee the garden, organize ball audits, and also in the Empire was the day of the summer solstice, the main holiday of the locals. This day was a symbol of the life of the deity that was the sun. But suddenly Angelica noticed Sylvia standing sadly below. Angelica asked Cicienne who this girl was, but she hesitated, not knowing the right words to say who she was. Angelique wondered what the girl was doing here, but Cicienne explained that Sylvia had requested an audience with the Empress. However, no one knew the reason for it. Then suddenly they crossed glances and Sylvia immediately bowed. Then Angelica wondered why Sylvia was only showing up now. After all, it had been a long time since the Emperor's decision to agree to the manhunt. Cicienne explained that Sylvia had requested an audience as early as the day after the verdict. And then Angelica turned around, not believing that Sylvia had been waiting for 5 days without food or a bath. So she asked that the girl be let in after all. As soon as they entered the audience room, Sylvia bowed immediately, explaining that she was pleased to meet His Majesty, and introduced herself, explaining that she was Henry Jacques' younger sister. But Angelique calmly explained that it was too late to visit her. Even so, Angelique was sorry that the girl had to stay here for 5 days, but she warned that if Sylvia wanted to ask for leniency for her family, she should just leave. But Sylvia explained that that was not the reason because everyone had to pay for what they had done. Angelica was very surprised by her words, as she thought that Sylvia had come here to ask for her family. But Sylvia resolutely turned to the Empress and explained that the moment her mother left the position of head maid, she realized that this was her chance. So she asked to be allowed to become head maid instead of her lying mother. Angelica was very surprised that the daughter of her enemy wanted to serve her. She thought that maybe Sylvia just wanted to grab this opportunity to take revenge on her while she was still around. So she warned her that Sylvia was not in a position to be trusted with this job. Sylvia understood everything, and her body began to shiver with a small shiver of helplessness. Looking at her, Angelica didn't understand why Sylvia was so worried, and she felt sorry for the girl. So much so that she was ready to shiver herself. Sylvia explained that she could not have any other intentions because she had been brought up as a wife for the Emperor and as a loyal empress who would be a friend to the Emperor. But now that her family would be prey, she had nowhere to go. Looking at Sylvia, Angelica remembered that the girl belonged to a fallen family of aristocrats and she really had nowhere to go, at least in this. She did not lie to her. But even so, still, Angelica had her doubts. Then Sylvia honestly admitted that it still hurt her to think about her family. Despite the way they treated her, they were still her own people. But more importantly, Sylvia just wanted to survive in this world. Angelica realized that they were very much alike, because all Angelica wanted was to survive. She realized that Sylvia wouldn't change the story. She wouldn't be a spouse for Raniero Actilus anyway, so she wouldn't be killed because of Sylvia. But in any case, Angelica still couldn't afford to trust this girl completely. After all, no one knows what she is thinking. Going outside, Angelica began to think about everything. She promised Sylvia that she would inform her decision soon, but she didn't know what decision she should make. But while she was just admiring the night sky and the fresh coolness, the Emperor appeared. He appeared out of nowhere and explained that walking suddenly at night had become a bad habit of Angelica, and worried that it was also one of her chronic diseases. The frightened girl began to ask the man what had brought him to her at such a late hour, but he leaned toward his wife as if to kiss her and asked if he needed a reason to visit the Empress. Angelica realized that it would be problematic if Raniero were to visit her in the future and did not know what to do. But Raniero smilingly thought that now was the right time for his visit. Angelica hoped that Raniero had not come to her because of a sense of unfulfilled duty, and saying this, she began to stammer, which made Raniero Actilus laugh. Then he leaned over to kiss her, and pulling away, asked if he should stop there. Angelica thought of nothing better than to thank the man for the kiss. After that, they started to ask each other how their day was and if everything was okay. Raniero said that he had a lot of fun because his hunters had started training, and he added 2 rules that he wanted to tell his wife. Firstly, the prey must also have weapons because if they can survive for 3 hours, they will win and be released. He also explained to Angelica that he added these rules on purpose and did not consult her, so the protagonist thought that he wanted to make her angry. But Angelica explained that if the Emperor was happy about it, she was also fine. Then Raniero started to ask Angelica again how she had spent her day as Empress. But she explained that she had been busy with reports and the plan to improve the garden. In fact, there was nothing interesting in this work, so she did not want to talk about it. Then suddenly, Raniero suggested Angelica to bring a girl to them because he thought it should be funny. At first, Angelica did not understand what kind of girl she was talking about, but Raniero thought that if Sylvia took part in the game as a hunter, it could help her to correct the mistakes of the past and prove her loyalty to Angelica. Angelica couldn't imagine Sylvia as a hunter, and she was horrified to hear that Raniero wanted a girl with her own hands to kill her mother and father. But he, on the contrary, thought it a splendid idea, for he was quite sure that Angelica was pondering whether Sylvia intended to harm her. He knew this, for the anxieties of ordinary people were always too obvious to him, so he wanted his dear wife to bring Sylvia Jacques. But there was one condition: if she proved herself a good hunter, she would be assigned to the position of head maid, as Sylvia wanted. In the end, Angelique agreed to her husband's conditions, and then he noticed her worried look on her face and was very surprised because he thought his idea was a good one. But he didn't like the way Angelique looked when she agreed to his conditions. He decided that in this case, he would give Sylvia the order, because it must have been painful for Angelica to say something like that to the girl, because he thought Angelica was too weak for something like that. Angelica realized that by the standards of Raniero Actilus, there were only weaklings in this world. But despite the fact that Raniero was born in the body of a human, he was actually a deity who considered humans useless gnats. He could do nothing but become cruel, and although his childhood could not be called miserable, Raniero was born pure evil. Suddenly, Raniero poured wine on the girl, explaining that she was too scared. Raniero felt that Angelica needed to immerse herself in pleasure and momentarily forget her fear. Then, looking around at this absolute evil, Angelica realized that Raniero was stronger and at the same time more beautiful than anyone else. So she had no other choice but to convince herself that everything would be all right. All the girl wanted was not to make any mistakes, so she went with Raniero Actilus to the bedroom. After it was over, Raniero grudgingly explained to Angelica that she had no stamina at all. plus was too petite, so she was difficult to handle, and he didn't know how the girl was going to become a great hunter if she possessed such a body. Frightened Angelica remembered that she was to become the Emperor's prey this winter, and with all the events it somehow slipped her mind. In fact, Angelica had no plans to become a prey. She wanted to wait for the winter, and when Raniero went on his expedition, everything would fall into place. Then he would meet the Holy Seraphim and would no longer look for her, and she would be able to go quietly into the shadows in another country. But suddenly Raniero remembered that she forgot to tell about the second rule, namely that Angelica also becomes a hunter. The frightened girl started to argue because she would not want to take on such a task. But Raniero smiled and asked his wife not to worry about anything because the game will definitely not bring her any harm. But that was his rule. He also explained that he would become a hunter, and then it became obvious to Angelique that Sylvia would not survive her encounter with this evil. And when her family died, she would take Angelica with her to get her revenge. Angelica also knew that Raniero realized that the rules were completely meaningless, and he had added them knowing they were meaningless. Raniero decided to open the hunt on the day of the summer solstice, and then the girl realized that it was only a month away. She had originally intended to make friends with the nobles in anticipation of the celebration, but all social events were canceled. And Marquise's mother and Marquis himself had been training fiercely to prepare and ultimately survive. Watching them fight, a frightened Angelique realized she couldn't even keep track of the point of their sword, and didn't know how she was supposed to fight them. She was allowed to observe the training. That's why she came. But it was obvious that these two were very talented warriors. Everyone in the empire, including children and women, learn martial arts so they can be called upon to fight at any time. The Duchess, also Angelica's maid, was surprised at the change that had taken place in the girl, because initially she had neglected training, but everything had changed after the Emperor had visited her yesterday. Angelica was sure that the Duchess already knew about the two new rules, but the woman convinced the girl that now they were looking for the best teacher for her. But Angelica realized that no matter how good the teacher was, there was only a month left for training, and Angelica chose a bow as her weapon. She wanted to keep her distance and control the situation from a long distance. Angelica begged the Duchess to teach her how to use the bow so she could stay as far away as possible. But the awkward Duchess explained to the girl that she had never heard of a bow being so hard to hold. Even a 10-year-old child could do it with ease. It was obvious to her that she had no chance against the people of the Empire, who had strong bodies and great strength. But today, she had to try to get at least near the target. Angelica didn't even hope to hit the center, because she had no experience, and all she had to do was to repeat the same actions many times. Later, the Emperor summoned Sylvia to him, because he had already heard that she wanted to become the Empress's maid, and asked her if she realized the position she had put herself in. The Emperor told her that he had a condition, namely that Sylvia should also become a hunter. Raniero was not surprised when he saw her shocked face, because this reaction was too predictable. As soon as she was taken away, Raniero inquired about the Empress's condition and behavior. He was told that all the events that had been planned were cancelled. The Emperor was amused by this, because he realized that Angelica was doing it out of cowardice, but he even thought it was a bit cute. However, the servant also reported that during the training the Empress fainted. From such news, the man was very angry and smiled angrily, and demanded an explanation as to how it happened and what it even meant. By that time, the girl woke up in her bed, and looking around, she guessed that she had fainted on the training ground. Angelica realized her stupidity, for she should have listened to the Duchess earlier and just stopped. Angelica was a princess, not a warrior, but the protagonist hoped that the girl had at least become more resilient while she was learning to ride horses. But apparently, she had been very weak since childhood. The Emperor suddenly appeared and asked why Angelica was always talking about her past, as if she didn't remember her childhood. The frightened Angelica didn't understand what the Emperor was doing here and was very frightened. And to him, this reaction seemed too boring. Angelica tried to explain what had happened yesterday, but the man already knew that she had fainted, and earlier he thought that something terrible had happened to her. But apparently he was wrong, because he could never think that she would faint from a walk on the training ground. The awkward Angelica thanked the man for his concern, but suddenly the emperor changed his face as if he was worried. She guessed that perhaps the reason was that her body was still very sore and shivering. She wanted to rest and waited for the emperor to leave. But the man looked carefully at the girl, directly explained that no matter how much he thought about what had happened, he thought she was too weak and stupid. And he didn't understand if it wasn't obvious that she should rest if she started to feel tired. Angelica realized that a perfect predator like Raniero would never be able to understand her. For even though Angelica had done almost nothing, she still fainted. In this country, they cannot realize that humans may not have the same majestic strength. Eventually unable to stand, the girl began to cry, explaining that she realized that in case of fatigue, she needed to rest, and all she wanted to do was try her best not to die. Raniero only smilingly explained to the girl that she would not die. He then asked that the Duchess bring cold water and silk towels. At the same time, he began to lay Angelica back on the bed. He explained that apparently the Empress was too ill, and so he wanted to take care of her. But this was said with such a face that Angelica was even more frightened and wanted to escape, even if it meant jumping off the balcony of her room. As soon as a towel and water were brought, Raniero made absolutely no attempt to make a compress. And despite the fact that it was obvious to everyone that the towel was too wet, Angelica denied it. And then, when Raniero Actilus got bored with his work as a healer, he decided to go away and call a maid. The girl was visited by the Duchess, who now took care of her instead of Raniero Actilus. Raniero, who was watching from the side, told the Duchess that because of the structure of Angelica's body, her body temperature was rising just by moving, and he had never seen such a thing before. The Duchess explained that the reason was the girl's weakness, and her body was resisting when she did things that were beyond her strength. He was sorry that the girl's peculiarities made her feel bad. Then, looking at the pose in which the man was, Angelica realized that this pose was a warning, and Raniero was literally showing the Duchess that she should go. So she tried to save the woman by explaining that she was very hungry and asked for food. Eventually, after 10 minutes, they brought her food, and for those 10 minutes, the Duchess was saved. Then she left, and Raniero started to spoon-feed the girl, surprised at how small her mouth was. He also warned her that tomorrow she would have to stay in the palace, and Angelica was surprised that the guy looked like he even cared about her. The reason was that Raniero really wanted to watch her training that she was dying for. Earlier, Raniero thought that it would be very funny to watch Angelica running away from her prey, but Angelica realized that most likely, if it continued like this, everyone would see the hunter become the prey. Raniero was once again convinced that Angelica would not be able to entertain him on the hunt, for it seemed to be too impossible a task for her. But he did not know how he would be able to get the reward after waiting so long. Angelica realized that this time she was the hunter, and in a few months she would be the prey. Of course, she was going to escape before Raniero Actilus met Serafima, but to do so, she had to win the man's trust. So she asked the emperor to have faith in her, for now she was looking for a mentor so that she could train properly and benefit from the training. The emperor was surprised to hear about a mentor, and the girl explained that now there was no use for her training at all, so she would not be of any use to Raniero Actilus as she needed to get better. But to her surprise, Raniero did not consider her useless and even persuaded her to give up the idea. But Angelica insisted that she would find an excellent mentor. According to her, Raniero realized that the girl had not found anyone yet, and therefore decided to become a mentor for her. But when Angelica wanted to clarify his intentions, the emperor immediately became madly dissatisfied and cold, which made it clear to her that it was better not to argue about this topic further. So she promised that she would never forget how the emperor personally decided to spend his time on her, and she promised to do her best in training. A little later, Angelica fell asleep again, and when she woke up, she realized that the medicine was good, because it worked quickly and she felt great. Perhaps it was also because Raniero had taken care of her last night, and she had fallen asleep immediately. Raniero had been by the girl's side even after midnight, and she had been told that he had returned to his room just as dawn began to break. Then she began to wonder when she should go to her training, but Cicienne explained that she didn't know that. Angelica was surprised because she thought that her personal maid had already found out everything from the emperor. So she asked the girl to hurry up. She quickly started to pack, and while Sicyon prepared her bow for shooting, Angelica realized that it was vital for her to get to the training fields before Raniero did. Otherwise, it would end badly. As soon as she arrived and just wanted to catch her breath behind her back, the emperor already showed up and bid Angelica good morning. He noticed that it was already past 10 o'clock, and apparently the girl was in no hurry to get to their class. She apologized fearfully, but then Raniero explained that he had been on the training ground for about 2 hours already. Angelica couldn't believe that the emperor had waited for her for so long, but suddenly he turned his attention to what was in her hands. Angelica explained that it was a bow because she was too weak, so it was the only weapon that would fit her. But suddenly the emperor took the bow from her hands and put a new one in it. The man guessed that most likely Angelica had never used a weapon that would fit her perfectly. And she explained that she had asked for a small weapon. This bow was much lighter than the one she'd used before. It felt better in her hands. But any bow would be useless if the archer couldn't draw the bowstring. Angelica was actually very grateful for the gift, so she smiled and thanked the emperor for it. But suddenly he saw the girl's face reddened with embarrassment and thought she had a fever, and was worried that the medicine didn't help her. But after realizing her embarrassment and having fun with Angelica's reaction, he decided to start their lessons. Angelica was amazed that now her husband would not reprimand her for being late, but would just start the workout. They began to train, and then taking Angelica captive, the emperor explained that she could have just died from the technique that he had already killed 60 people. The girl begged for mercy, but Raniero was not going to stop. In fact, Raniero Actilus got tired of practicing on shooting targets in less than half an hour, so he took out a wooden sword from somewhere, which he handed to the girl, and they immediately started practicing without any theory. Raniero believed that the best practice was real combat conditions, so without explaining anything, he looked the girl over and started attacking her. Obviously, her swordsmanship was nothing compared to this monster in a human body. She fought and blocked his attacks as best she could, but it was useless because she had no experience with weapons. So every time Raniero won and explained her mistakes, telling her what kind of death would be waiting for her if they were in a real fight instead of practicing. When once again the girl began to lose consciousness, she lay down on the ground to rest. Raniero realized that most likely Angelica now believed him when he said that she needed to be universally advanced in martial arts. Before this, Angelica had actually refused to notice the fact that just one blow could destroy her, especially if it was delivered from ambush. She also recognized how big the difference between them was. But Raniero explained that in a combat situation, the enemies would definitely not spare her, so such was no excuse, and she needed to narrow that gap between them, not talk about it. At the end, he began to explain the basics of swordsmanship to Angelica, step by step. He told her that it was necessary to move her waist if she wanted to adjust the distance to the enemy. He also told her that the proper use of her shoulders, elbows, and wrists were the basis of the controlling trajectory of the sword. And although Raniero Actilus complained that Angelica couldn't repeat after him, it seemed he wasn't going to stop teaching her. And despite her tormentor's complaints, Angelica was amazed that the man who brought absolutely no boredom volunteered to train her. When the class was over, Angelica thanked her teacher and promised that she would do her best, no matter how long it took. But no matter how big the Actilus Empire was, rumors spread like wildfire. Though without an official announcement, rumors of a hunting festival spread throughout aristocratic society. Everyone already knew that the festival would be held during the summer solstice in the new hunting grounds. Sylvia Jacques, the emperor and empress, were hunters. The maids, thinking about the last days, remembered how everything was fine. But during one of the trainings, their empress Angelica was injured. And the emperor, as a caring husband for a long time, took care of her and also waited for her to train, and did not scold her for helplessness, and gave her a bow. But the worst thing for Angelica is that absolutely everyone found out about it, and the rumors reached from the capital nobility to the neighboring country. But Angelica could do nothing about it, for that was the job of the empress's maids. They hid a little unnecessary truth, and a little embellished the emperor and empress. And it was the rumors they spread that helped the girl to strengthen her position and connections. Anyway, Angelique still planned to run away because she doesn't want to become a reason for discussion. But now she has to play the role of an exemplary wife of the emperor, because nobody knows when another such Marquis Jacques might appear. The maids explained that these gifts were from Raniero Actilus, and the girl thought that they were bought gifts for the whole empire. But as it turned out, there was only a part of the gifts, and also the Duchess explained that it would take a little time for the rumors about the emperor's love for his wife to reach the villages. Angelique paid attention to this maid because she had been acting too friendly lately, and it was obviously for a reason. And perhaps Angelique would have liked it if the Duchess had not served Roberta Jacques in the past. Among all the gifts was also a letter where Raniero expressed his desire to hunt as soon as possible. Angelique was also curious to know what she would accomplish in the next month. Then she asked Sicien when the hunting grounds would be ready. It would take about 3 days to prepare. Angelique realized that no matter how hard she tried to defeat the Jacques family, it would be very difficult. So she decided that if she couldn't defeat them by force, she would have to defeat them by information. Although improving her strength, Angelique also worked on it. So she constantly ate protein food, such as salads with chicken breast, to gain muscle. She also continued to train with Raniero Actilus, which were already more successful. But Angelica tired too quickly, and looking at her, the emperor explained that she was completely different, as if she did not belong to the human race. Angelica understood why he was saying that, and she was also interested in how many times she had already lost in training fights. It was obvious that her instructor's genius would not extend to her, just because they were practicing together. But Raniero reprimanded her every time she moved in some wrong way, which helped her to improve her mobility during the fight. But out of the blue, Raniero suggested Angelica go to the hunting grounds. Angelica was surprised at the suddenness of it, but didn't argue. She wanted to take a break from her training. When they reached the tower, Angelica admired the scenery of the mountains and realized that in this empire, everything was done with great care. It seemed to Angelica that from this tower, one could look to the other side of the world and that it was the best place for an archer. Raniero suddenly spoke to the girl and explained that he wanted her to know that he had worked really hard for her when he had prepared the hunting grounds. Angelica understood perfectly well. Then Raniero asked her if she liked the hunting grounds. Of course, the answer was obvious, and then Raniero started talking about their training. Initially, he had fun teaching Angelica, but she was so clumsy that now he was concerned because he had trained her personally. And now, for the time spent, he expected good results, so he expected the best from the huntress in summer and from the prey in winter. After that day, time seemed to go twice as fast. Every morning, Angelica practiced with Raniero Actilus. This time, their training with the bow was more demanding. After that, Angelica prepared for the day of the summer solstice from morning to night, all the time in addition to her training hours. Sicien was constantly helping her. Although earlier the girl was concerned about not seeing Sylvia, but now she didn't have time to think about it anymore. As soon as she wanted to get some rest, Raniero appeared and entered the Empress's castle. As soon as the Emperor appeared, all her maids with whom they were organizing things immediately scattered away. But Raniero demandingly explained to the girl that she should become much braver, for she looked as if she were worried again. Angelica was really scared, despite the fact that they had practiced every time. And simply Raniero himself was still scaring her. Raniero only laughed, because the girl was not some defenseless rabbit, but he was wondering why she was looking at him with such a look. She did not understand what it had to do with, but Raniero thought that Angelica was laughing at him, only with her eyes. So in his opinion, the Empress was too bold. The girl excitedly began to explain that he was mistaken, and recalled that earlier he had compared her to a small and cute furry animal, although she was not. But by his logic, if she was a cute animal, then she couldn't mock him. But suddenly, Raniero had had enough of this talk, and he drew close and kissed her until her body began to tremble. Then he slowly began to stretch her dress. Raniero continued the kiss and took off the dress, then explained that during the time he was with Angelica, he had learned about everything his wife liked. At this point he stopped, noting that the girl had probably expected more, so he was sorry to upset her so much. And even Angelica herself was not happy with her behavior and could not believe that she was expecting a continuation. But when she turned to the mirror, she noticed that while the man was distracting her with kisses, he had somehow magically managed to put another dress on her and did it so discreetly that she didn't even realize it. She admired herself while Raniero explained that he had learned that Angelica liked dresses that were unadorned. Then she realized the reason why the man had started undressing her and awkwardly thanked him for such a gift. Gently kissing a strand of her hair, Raniero explained that she had chosen this color of the dress because it matched her hair, and he hoped that the girl would wear it to the banquet on the sacred summer solstice. But Raniero reminded her that if Angelica died during the hunt, the dress would be lost, and he did not want his gift to go to waste. After a while, June came, and with June came the day of the summer solstice. The girl realized that today was a long-awaited and very important day, and the hunt would begin after noon. Therefore, she had to prepare for this moment. From the moment of moving into this novel, the main task of the protagonist was survival. So she realized that if she could overcome this obstacle now, she would eventually be able to escape from the sinking ship. As soon as she arrived at the emperor, she asked if she was late. But the man immediately pulled the girl in his arms and explained that he had been waiting for her again for 2 whole hours. Angelica was worried because she knew that if someone would see them from the outside, they would probably think that they were in a very happy relationship, which made her feel uncomfortable. After she calmed down and the emperor started to ask Angelica about her well-being and what she would do as soon as she entered the hunting grounds, the girl wanted to run towards the center to take the highest position, and she wanted to avoid close combat. Raniero understood such a decision. After all, the girl couldn't even withstand his punch, but she awkwardly explained that she was still able to last a full 30 seconds. But Raniero calmly explained that the reason for this was that he was moving terribly slowly. But it was time to announce the start of the Summer Solstice Festival, so confetti was sprinkled and the festivities began. Raniero took Angelica by the hand and appeared before his people, introducing his wife, and the citizens marveled at the beauty of the empress. After the opening of the event, all the aristocrats went to dinner, where Angelica did not eat. Raniero was worried that the girl had no appetite, but she explained to him that everything was fine. But in fact, he was right. She really did not want to eat because she was nervous about the upcoming hunt, because she could not survive until morning. Raniero explained that it was a small gift for her as a support. Looking at the drink, Angelica realized it was a different color. She began to speculate. But when Raniero asked her to finish her drink, she did so immediately, because she knew that she should not argue with the man and should do what he told her to do. Raniero realized that the girl was ready to drink even poison if he gave it to her, and immediately after she drank the contents of the glass, her hands and feet began to burn, and she did not understand what was happening. She started to choke, and Raniero asked her to be patient for a while because she would feel better soon. But eventually, she started laughing hysterically, and when the aristocrats paid attention to her, she demanded that they return to the banquet and continue enjoying the food. Raniero held up his wife and explained to the aristocrats that they should heed the words of the empress. Then all immediately did so. Angelica began to eat the food offered. The taste of her meat was quite unusual, and all her senses were heightened. But it was very tasty, so the girl was satisfied with the effect. From the moment Raniero gave the girl the alcohol, she had a strange feeling. Her body felt hot and light, and afterward it became heavy again. But now, instead of feeling nervous, she was looking forward to the hunt. I also brought her a gift through the maids. It was a small vial with a note. The Duchess explained that it was a purified form of a deadly poison produced by poisonous frogs, and the Emperor believed that the girl knew exactly how to use it. And it was true.